Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Planning, Building, and Environmental Committee meeting for March 12th, 2018. My name is Joanne Cheechak, and I'll be chairing the meeting tonight. I am the chair of Planning. I would like to ask all of you, if you have pagers, cell phones, or PDAs, that you turn them off at this point in time so as not to disrupt the meeting. And additionally, for your information, we are audio taping and video recording this meeting, and it will be available on the Township website later this week. Okay. Members of committee, are there any changes in the order of items on the agenda? Seeing none, I'll move on to ask for disclosure of pecuniary interest and/or conflict. Seeing none, then I'm going to move on. Tonight we have no public meetings under the Planning Act, but we do have an opportunity, a meeting at the beginning of this for public comment regarding the West Lincoln Agricultural Society site alteration. Is there anyone here wishing to make comment with regard to that? And I will go to our staff at the end of this opportunity. Sir, if you'll come forward to the microphone, state your name and your address, your full address, we'll be happy to listen to your comments. Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Nick DeFilippis. I live at 44 Mott Street West, which is basically in Grassy, which is basically along the entire length of the, I'll call it Wanus for simplicity, on across the street basically from the fair.
On the north side.
North side.
Thank you.
The development of this fairgrounds was a culmination of a lot of work and money on our part to make sure that there were development controls and that it wasn't a free-for-all. When they first approached the township with building this fair, we spent extensive time with meetings, money with lawyers, time at the OMB, getting settlements and so on and so forth to make sure that this happened in a controlled environment. We came to an agreement. There was a minutes of settlement that we were very diligent about getting enforced, and a lot of that was incorporated into what you see now as part of the fairgrounds. There are areas of that property, because there was additional lands, almost another 50 acres, if I'm not mistaken, that were left as agricultural, with a certain area, from what I understand, designated for occasional use to service the fair when the fair was on. So it was not basically a permanent part of the fairgrounds, but only occasional use. So the area in question that is before us today is part of that lands that are what we would consider the occasional use or accessory use to the fall fair, or the fair as it goes on at the fairgrounds. Unfortunately, what's happened, and we've complained several times over probably the last year, not necessarily in 2018, but all of 2017, hundreds of loads of fill were brought into that property. The 1,000 cubic meters is far-fetched from what it actually is. It's probably closer to 7,000 or 8,000 cubic meters of fill. And completely uncontrolled, of just dumping, so much so that the actual contractor doing the filling left his dozer there almost the entire year because there was so much filling going on. The roads were always covered in mud, very cleaned only when there was complaints. It seemed like there was never any organized pattern there. So when I had an opportunity to read the site alteration bylaw that was put in probably back in 15 because of other issues, other areas in the township where people were filling without permits. And I've found that probably the Wanus has violated almost every single statute in that site alteration bylaw. And now I sent in a letter. I think you've all read it. It's in the minutes for this thing. And I think I find it kind of offensive that all this illegal activity is just going to be fluffed off on the back of the cigarette pack sketch that they handed in and say we're applying for our site alteration permit. Fill's been brought in. It's been piled, compacted. They've put in gravel. They put in uncontrolled runoff. It goes in all directions. It's not controlled to the quality or the quantity storm ponds that were built for part of the fairgrounds. So we'll have water going in all directions. I had an opportunity to speak to the Minister of Environment today, and the same thing, was never any
Consultation?
with them or permits for the fill or tests of the fill that was put onto the site. So we don't know what's there. I mean, they're not all from one source. They're from the whole years of trucking from all different sites and all different areas. We don't know if there's any contaminants in that fill. Now you have runoff coming from contaminated fill, filing into the roadside ditches and to the rest of that farmland, to the aquifer and other areas. My point for being here tonight is not to contest the use. I mean, although now that it's been upgraded as it has today, it can very easily be used on a more than an occasional basis. It's more that this fill needs to either be removed or we need a site plan amendment and basically hash out all the controls that were put on that main site, because this is no different than that. The usage on that property will contribute to all the negative effects that are possible to the surrounding areas, and I don't think there's any reason why that should not be dealt with. Just if they're pleading ignorance to the bylaw, that's not an excuse. According to what I read in the bylaw, it is a punishable offense in the municipal act and also provincial offenses court. We know we don't have an avenue at the OMB. However, we're not going to let it just go by the wayside. So to have a recommendation to just approve as is, I think is completely wrong. I think it needs to be addressed engineering-wise, no different than when we did the fall fair. If this area is going to be like that, and what they've done, I don't see it as an excuse for what they've done. Like I said, there's thousands of cubic meters, not 1,000. And I think it's a gross violation, an illegal activity that's happened, and I don't think you can say that they're, like I said, ignorance is an excuse for them.
Okay, so thank you very much, Mr. DeFilippis. Is that because you've used some terms that are unsubstantiated at this point, but we're not in a public meeting, so I've allowed you some flexibility there.
Well, then I beg the want us to substantiate them.
I'm just saying that this is not a court of law where we
No, I'm not saying it is
where we
not.
put out all kinds of allegations for the other side to, in fact, refute. I think if your concerns are that there's been an amount of fill brought in, we appreciate your bringing it forward tonight, and that's what tonight's meeting is about. But I think we're going to hear from our staff as well as from
Right.
anyone else that wishes
Madam
to
Chair,
speak.
from what I see and what they submitted, there's nothing substantiating what they've said they've done either. So I find that if you fail to provide information, then you're failing to tell the full story.
Thank you very much, Mr. DeFilippis.
Thank you.
Are there others wishing to speak to the item on the agenda? Sir, if you'll come forward, state your name and your address.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
My name is Robert Lee. I live at 3525 Regional Road 12 across on Grimsby Road from the fairgrounds. In effect, I agree with everything that Mr. DeFilippis has said. I guess my biggest concern is the fact that we are doing this backward. The fact that the work has already been done and all of a sudden we're giving them a permit for site alterations really bothers me. Because throughout this whole time, when I read this report from your staff where it said the fill was being placed on the site by construction despite township staff advising they must follow the township site alteration bylaw, but yet still staff didn't go out to inspect it or didn't make sure that it was being done properly, it wasn't done, or anything like that. And that really bothers me. The other situation is that, as Mr. DeFilippis said, we did have an OMB ruling, and we have watched several things and several infractions being done over at the WNAS. When we contact the OMB about it, we are always told that it's up to the township to reinforce it. If I was to come to Mr. Treble or come to township staff, I'm told that they don't have resources. So that's another thing that really bothers me, that we just basically let the WNAS do whatever the hell they want, excuse the language.
Yeah, I'd refrain from any kind of slips.
But but it really concerns me. As Mr. DeFilippo says, one of our biggest concerns was drainage and effects on the aquifer. And this is something that I think was done with this work. Basically, we've messed with the aquifer and the drainage problem again. So that's all I have to say. Thanks very much for letting me speak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lee. As this is, again, not a public meeting, but an opportunity to hear from residents in the general vicinity of the lands affected, known as the West Lincoln Agricultural Society, or is there anyone else wishing to speak? No? Seeing none, then I'm going to, okay, we're going to confine this two different ways, and we're going to ask staff, Mr. Treble, if you would have a few words about the process to how we got here, and after which it will be confined to table if any members of committee wish to address the issue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the public have identified a bit of the process that got us here. There were two complaints that were lodged with the township in 2017. One was in the summer, the other was in December, at which time staff were informed that the importation of fill onto the property was occurring. There are two forms of fill that have been occurring on site. One is topsoil, which is exempt from the bylaw. There is no limitation to the amount of topsoil that is required to be brought onto a property, and there is no approval process required for topsoil. In addition to that, though, there was some fill which would be more of a subsoil than a topsoil, and that was brought onto the property. Under the site alteration bylaw, the intent is that applicants obtain approval first, and there's 3 different thresholds of approval depending on the volume or quantity of fill that's being brought onto the site. If it's less than 500 cubic meters, there is no approval required. However, staff have been requiring that the property owners sign a form that confirms that the fill is clean. If it's between 500 cubic meters and 1,000 cubic meters, and I'm told that roughly 10 cubic meters equals a truck, so it's like 50 to 100 trucks. It's kind of, I think, simple math probably, but in that ballpark, that in that range of 500 cubic meters to 1,000 cubic meters, that under the site alteration bylaw is a staff approval. And once again, we do require a form to be signed that says that that they ensure that the fill that's being brought onto the site is clean. Above 1,000 cubic meters or above 100 truckloads per year, then it requires approval of council, and the site alteration bylaw as written says that council will only give consideration to a permit after a public process. So now, if we stop there and we talk about bylaw enforcement for a second, the first thing that a court system will do is they will look to say, okay, have we attempted to find a resolution? So in this particular case, before any bylaw action was done,
Right.
we received an application for a permit for site alterations. So yes, it may in fact be after the fact, but the courts are certainly going to turn to that and say, finish that process, see if there's a way that you can find a resolution or a solution, and if so, proceed on that basis and avoid bogging down the court system. So at this particular point in time, we are looking at works that were done a year ago, but works that are done based on a plan, and I think Garrett has the sketch, plus there is also a site plan that applies to the entire property. The sketch we'll look at in a second, but the site plan contemplates in the middle area a proposed midway, and there are about 15 different plans that are all part of the site plan. One of the plans that zooms in a little bit more on the agricultural area also says proposed midway demo pit tractor pull area. So it clearly contemplates a variety of different uses in the area kind of where Garrett has the mouse. And that particular area is generally the area in question. And it's outside what's considered the urban boundary of Grimsby Center. So it's the area where it's an agricultural designation underneath, but clearly intended to allow for accessory or supportive type uses to the agricultural society use of the main buildings and structures on the property. Garrett, can you pull up the other for a second? So the application that's before us tonight is for a berm adjacent to the tractor pull area, which is generally in that same area that the other plan was showing for the types of uses that were mentioned. And are, although not substantiated in terms of the content or the concept of a berm, certainly there was an indication on at least one of the plans that there would be some sort of a buffer area in the form of a treed strip that would be contemplated. So I think some sort of a buffer area was envisioned.
Just for clarity, Mr. Treble, you're talking about on the plans that were submitted some time ago that talk about the eventuality of what the site will look like. Is that right?
That's correct. There is a site plan agreement
Right.
and site plans, and those contemplate uses over time on these lands. Yes, they're to be intermittent and not all the time, but the uses are allowed to be outside the area that is designated for institutional use, which includes the buildings and structures. So it's to be accessory or subordinate type uses to the agricultural fair and buildings and structures. So, Madam Chair, through our review, we have to, in many respects, like in a planning process in my mind, set aside the procedure and look at the ultimate end result and do the analysis based on whether or not the end result that's proposed in this particular situation is generally in keeping with the intent of the various documents that we have before us. In addition to that, site alteration does allow for some minor adjustments or tweaks, I would argue, in addition to what a site plan originally contemplates. In this particular area, although we don't know how much or how many truckloads were actually imported, if one was to calculate the area of the privacy berm as shown on the plan, and I believe, Madam Chair, it's an attachment to the report as well, 340 feet long by 32 feet wide by 6.5 feet high, works out to about 328 truckloads of fill using the simple 10 cubic meters per truck analogy. I'm hearing from the neighbors that there's far more than that. However, over the last several years, if that's what we're talking about, there have been a number of berms that have been required to be built as part of the site plan process as well. So if the truckloads were being dumped on some of the other areas of the property that were meant to be berms in accordance with the site plan, then they are nothing to do with this application tonight. They were approved through that process. This was not contemplated as a berm on the site plan, hence the reason for the site alteration discussion. At the end of the day, Madam Chair, the owner is obligated to ensure that the soil is clean. That is a Ministry of the Environment standard. It's the owner's obligation to ensure the soil that they are bringing to the site is clean. We have looked at the site plan. We're of the opinion that the proposal is in keeping with the site plan. And Madam Chair, it's our recommendation that a site alteration permit can be approved and that a red line revision, as we call it, to the site plan would be appropriate. It's not a formal consultation process. It is simply a means by which we make sure that the adjustment is documented in the language of the site plan itself for future reference.
Thank you, Mr. Treble. I'm not sure if there's anyone that wants to comment, but as that concludes Mr. Treble's discussion about the application or about the issue, are there members of committee that wish to speak? Councillor Bilsma.
So just a question to Director of Planning through you, Chair. The variation between topsoil and subsoil or fill, is that a very defined term? Like, is that clearly demarked, or is there a definition of, or is it loose? Allows for a lot of wiggle room, or is it a tight designation in your opinion?
How do you define one to the other?
Yeah.
Madam Chair, through you, there are two definitions in the site alteration bylaw. Topsoil is defined as those horizons in a soil profile commonly known as O and A horizons, containing organic material and includes deposits of partially decomposed organic material such as peat. And fill is a loosely defined term, I would say, in the sense that it is any type of material deposited or placed on lands and, without limiting the generality of the foregoing, includes soil, stone, concrete, construction material, rubble, asphalt, sod, turf, either singularly or in combination thereof. So you can have any multiple combinations of that type of material. So topsoil is fairly defined, and I think any kind of person with a farming understanding probably would have a good idea of what that includes, whereas the subsoil can be a little bit broader in its nature.
Okay, and then a kind of a follow-up. If half of the soil that's in question is topsoil, and we don't have necessarily a challenge, we don't have recourse to limit that, and that was part of the bylaw, and that was an important part. Is there still concerns then for stormwater management and various drains, and how does that get rectified if, for example, a particular owner fills in a swale and creates a back log of water upstream and floods out a neighbor? The fill is legitimate because he filled it in with topsoil, but it did create a problem upstairs. So is that our responsibility? Is that a neighbor-to-neighbor responsibility? How is that reconciled?
Through you, Madam Chair, I guess there's a couple of thoughts I have on that. The first is that if it was some sort of a channelized area for water flow, in our township, it's very likely the Conservation Authority would have some regulatory control, and hence, inside regulated areas, our bylaw says that it's the Conservation Authority rules that would apply, not our rules. In this particular instance, there is no Conservation Authority regulation on the property, so I didn't seek input from them. And because the property is fairly large in size and the area impacted was fairly central, it seemed like most of the impact would be limited to the site. Having said that, if there was some sort of a swale or channel, then I believe under common law there is an obligation to ensure that that swale, or at least the amount of water accepted from neighbors, continues. So
The riparian rights of neighbors would be observed by another organization, MOECC or something.
correct. So to the best of my knowledge, though, that's not been raised as an issue in this particular location, but certainly could be dealt with either through the site alteration permit or the Conservation Authority. They definitely have teeth to regulate that kind of situation, Madam Chair.
Right, no further. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any other comments, questions, or concerns? This is on the agenda later, the report itself, so anyone wishing to speak by the time we get there can also do that. Seeing no other comments, I will move on to item 4 of our agenda, which is appointments. There are no appointments here this evening, so the request to address items on the agenda. That is any item on the agenda, and anyone here this evening wishing to address anything on the agenda, please come forward, state your name and your address, and we'll be happy to hear your comments. If you could tell us which item you're speaking to as well.
Speaking
Pardon.
to the McFeeters application to
I presume so.
rezone. And I just want to, my name's Rob McDougall, 2812 South Skinsbury Road, 21.
Thank you, Mr. McDougall.
Just the late addition, I guess, from my perspective anyway, of the request to allow outside storage. Or I guess they have to, again, I can only assume things because none of this was brought up at the initial meetings. So I'm assuming that because they want to rezone to an ag-related zoning, that does not allow storage in the front portion of the property. And now they're asking for it because they are storing in the front portion of the property already. So I'm assuming that's why they're asking for it, and I've put it in at the last minute as a request. Anyone that's been around for a while, specifically Brian Treble, knows I've been asking for years to have screening on the west side. It was brought up at the OMB hearing, and if you read the notes in the OMB, Mr. Alex Grayovac actually committed to planting trees along the west boundary to address our concerns at the time. It was committed by the township to address our concerns through site planning. And again, the site plan was created. There is nothing along the roadside on the northwest corner. And in the last 2 years, they've eliminated what grass strip was there. It was probably 30, 40 feet wide. They tore that up and are putting their pallets of shavings right up against the fence. So I was told there would be no further opportunities for site plan upgrades because there was no changes. Well, this is a change, I think, and there's going to have to be some site plan discussion. And I would hope that they're going to present something tonight that talks about how they're going to deal with that. If they want a store in the front yard, how they're going to screen it. And my preference would be obviously some berming and tree planting of coniferous type trees, something that kind of brings the property into a line with the surrounding areas. But definitely, again, it's been asked for years because this is an industrial complex out in an agricultural area, and it doesn't look like an agricultural property.
Thank you very much. So this item that you spoke to is on the agenda later, and it will be addressed there, and members of committee will have an opportunity to ask questions at that time. Thank you very much. Any other requests to address items on the agenda? Sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Mike Crow. I'm a senior planner with IBI Group out of Hamilton. I'm the agent for the owner, and I'm speaking to McFeeders as well. So first and foremost, I would just like to say that as the agent, we've read the staff recommendation report, the proposed zoning. We are in full agreement with that, and we support that. I didn't plan to say much more other than that, but just given the gentleman speaking before me, he did raise the issue of outside storage and whether that's a new item. I would just like to draw your attention to the zoning wording, the site-specific zoning wording that exists right now, which does include reference for outside storage. So it says, as for the parent zone plus industrial use limited to a sawmill for the production, manufacture, drying, processing, treating, outside storage, and sale of wood products. If you refer to the draft bylaw presented by staff, it's the exact same wording. So it's not a new request or a new item. We're just simply taking the existing site-specific wording and putting it into a new zoning prefix, the AR zone. So there's really no change to that. Other than that, we're very happy with the bylaw. We support the recommendations for both Parts 1 and Part 2. We agree with the lot coverage maximum of 10%, and certainly the use wording and the approach taken on the agricultural parcel, which really restricts uses within those accessory structures, but also recognizes their setbacks. That's all as what we would apply for as well. So everything reflects our application as also it's evolved through the review process, and we're happy to see that, and of course we support that. That's it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Crow. Again, this item is on the agenda later and will be discussed by committee at that time. Okay. Are there any other requests to address items on the agenda? Seeing none, I will move on to the consent agenda items, of which there are 5. The first being a public advisory committee, the PAC minutes from October 24th, 2017, the information report number PD 043-18, proposed inclusionary zoning regulations. Third is the information report PD 042-18, which is the protocol for planning services, pardon me, between the region of Niagara and Niagara Conservation Authority. And fourth, the information report on PD 025-18, which is the MOECC Community Emissions Reduction Planning. Pardon me. And fifth is the recommendation report PD 044-18, resolution to authorize Committee of Adjustment to consider minor variances to the new comprehensive zoning bylaw. The recommendation for those 5 items are that the Planning, Building, Environmental Committee hereby approves the following consent agenda items, that items 1, 2, 3, and 4 be and are hereby received for information, and that item 5 be and is hereby received, and recommendations contained therein are adopted, with the exception of any items committee so chooses. I need a mover and a seconder, and anyone wishing, Councillor Bilsma, Councillor Gannan. Any items wishing to be pulled? Councillor Gannan. Almost got by you.
Number 1, please.
Number 1. Okay, so that would change recommendation number 1, recommendation that items 2, 3, and 4 be and are hereby received for information. Failing to see any other exclusions, I would ask this motion. This is now moved and seconded appropriately. All in favor? That motion carries. Now, as to item 1, the Public Advisory Committee PAC minutes for October 24th. Councillor Gannan. Oh, I need a mover and a seconder first.
So moved.
Councillor Bilsma, Councillor Gannan. Thank you. Councillor Gannan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just was reading those minutes, and of course, they've come from October. They're fairly old minutes. But I did want to say that I very much like the motion that came out of that committee and out of those minutes to strike a committee of citizens who are impacted by the tree loss. And I guess my question is perhaps to our acting CAO, through you, if I may, to just know what the process would be to get that actually happening. I know it's a concern that many citizens have had over what is happening with the trees, and I think having a committee of people who are involved and also those who are experts in the matter might, be a very good suggestion, but I just don't know from this point how it would go from those minutes to that actually happening.
And I'll turn this to the CAO in a moment, but I envisioned that we would get a report from the CAO that would include our position on trees, as well as a report that suggested a committee falling under this. But Madam CAO.
Through you to members of the committee, we are aware of the recommendation contained in those minutes, and it will be forthcoming at a future meeting and by way of a report.
So Councillor Gannan does not have to have a staff direction or put a recommendation on the table to have that brought back. It will come through your report. I think that's what you wanted to know.
I wanted to know the process, so thank you very much.
Okay. So having that clarification, and thank you, Councillor Gannan, for bringing that forward, the motion is duly put and seconded. All in favor? That motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay, there are no communications for this evening. We're moving on to staff reports, and the first item on the agenda is PD 28-18, which is a recommendation report regarding the site alteration report permit.
Point of privilege, Madam Chair.
Sir.
Councillor has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that. We did. We did
What was the
items
first?
2, 3, 4, and item 5. No. No, sir. Items 1, 2, 3, 4, and item 5 were put. Then Councillor Gannan excluded item 1. So 2, 3, 4, and item 5 were put, moved and seconded, and a motion to carry. Sorry. No, item 1 was amended for... No, sir.
I think you're good.
Unless you want to challenge the chair, item 1 was the one that was amended. Item 2 was as put. Okay? Sorry. Thank you. Staff report PD 28-18 is the recommendation report regarding site alteration permit 006-2017 for 7202 Mud Street. The recommendations attached to that report are that PD 041-18 regarding the site alteration permit 006-2017 for 7402 Mud Street dated March 12, 2018 be approved, and that a site alteration permit 006-2017 attached for the importation of more than 1,000 cubic meters of fill be approved by Township Council and issued by staff in accordance with bylaw 2016-41. I need a mover and a seconder for that. Councillor Bell, Councillor Bilsma. Oh, sorry, Councillor Trombetta. That motion is now on the table. Are there any comments or questions regarding that item?
Yeah.
Seeing none. Oops. Sorry. Yes, Councillor Bilsma.
So I respect staff's recommendation to approve, and I know that there's a kind of a situation because of the,
Your question, Councillor Bilsma.
is this a change to the original then? Is this a modification of what was originally approved by the group and its neighbors with the OMB 3 or 4 years ago, whenever it was started? I just want to know if this is additional or if was covered by that. That's my question.
I'm going to direct that to staff in a moment, but as staff have already said, there has been importation of fill, which is not regulated by the site alteration bylaw and by our infill bylaw. But in fact, there are members of the public who are concerned about the amount of fill versus topsoil. So, Mr. Treble, have you got anything further than what you already indicated?
Madam Chair, I think a couple of points I can add if possible. The first is I would view the negotiations and the ultimate OMB decision as, in many respects, minimum standards that had to be satisfied, specifically as they related to concerns of neighbors to the north and to the east. This particular issue, I would argue, is in addition to the site plan in the sense that it is in an area to the west, not really ever being a focus of any discussions. It was understood that it would be supplemental lands for the fair. It was understood that it would be, tractor pull or fairground or midway or those kind of uses, but we never really delved into a lot of the detail to any great extent. So I don't see this as in any way a violation or a change from what the site plan agreement was. I would argue it's an addition, perhaps. I would assume from the Agricultural Society's point of view, it would be increasing or improving the ability of the tractor pull and midway uses in that particular area, hence why they've done it. But certainly from my point of view, the site plan didn't go as far as to contemplate berms in this particular area. In addition to that, though, Madam Chair, there is a process known as a red line revision opportunity, which provides opportunity for minor adjustments to the site plan. It's contemplated in the Planning Act as well as in the site plan bylaw of the township. And as an example, there's already been one red line revision of this property to allow for a cattle tie building to be added to the property. So that particular building was not part of the original plan either, but has been approved and was added to the plan through a red line revision by staff, and is an example of what I foresee as the appropriate way to deal with this particular berm issue if council supports it.
Thank you. Councillor Bismarck?
Yeah, just one final question. Will this, if we approve this tonight, does it make us somewhat legally liable if there's some kind of
I think to get that
injury or some kind of
Councillor Bilsma, to get that answer, I think we'd have to go on camera.
Oh, okay.
So if you choose to want to do that, well, you're asking about liability.
Yeah.
We go for legal advice in camera. So if that's the question you want to ask, I would have to say we would have to go in camera.
Okay. Then perhaps we should, I would like an answer to that. So, before I approve it.
So that's fine. I'll go to the CAO at the appropriate moment.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, I will allow Councillor Ganaan to ask her questions.
Yep.
Could you turn him-
Yeah? Okay, Mike?
Please,
Okay,
Councillor
thank you,
Ganaan,
thank
sorry.
you. We were just fiddling with the mics, and I wasn't sure what was going on there. Anyway, I have also, through you, Madam Chair, have a question. The residents who spoke tonight, both of them addressed the issue of drainage and perhaps any effect that any of the potentially poor runoff could have an effect on the aquifer and so on. I'm wondering, with the January thaw that we had with so much water abounding, and also the one in February where all the snow melted, if the township was made aware of any issues with drainage at that time, or either of those times, actually, either January or February thaws.
Through you, Madam Chair, there are no concerns that have been brought to my attention I'd have to check with Public Works perhaps to see if there was any concerns brought or filed through the Public Works registry, but I would think I would have heard of them. So at this point, I don't believe there are any.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bill, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Mr. Treble, it's my understanding you had 2 complaints in all of 2017, one in the summer, one in the fall. Would that be correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, that is correct. And the biggest focus of the complaints each time was more about the mud on the road. So the site alteration was brought to our attention as the cause for that mud, hence the reason for the site alteration discussion.
And through you, Madam Chair, and staff visited the site?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, each time.
Okay, and that led to this application tonight?
Through you, Madam Chair, it led to the issuance of a bylaw enforcement order, which then presumably subsequently led to this application.
Okay, thank you.
So just for clarification, before I go to anyone else that's asking questions, there has been an order to comply, and an application came in, and that's the process we're in right now.
Through you, Madam Chair, that's correct. In similar fashion to other sort of zoning-related
Yes.
bylaw enforcement matters, there was an order placed on the property, and this is the resolution that the applicants are seeking.
Thank you.
The order, through you, Madam Chair, the order is dated December 20th.
Thank you very much, Mr.
2017.
Treble. Councillor Bell, are you concluded? Thank you. Okay. Okay, Madam CAO, you're on the hot spot. How do we proceed so as to give Mr. Councillor Billsma his answer?
Through you to members of the committee, we do not currently have a legal opinion regarding liability on this issue. What is before you is a recommendation that it is appropriate to approve this. If we want to talk about potential liability, it would be something we would have to discuss with the lawyer and come back to you with a response. However, I believe Mr. Treble would have addressed and not put forward a recommendation for approval if there were any liability issues. And perhaps we can ask for a response from Mr. Treble.
Mr. Treble?
Through you, Madam Chair, I guess what I can...
Can I say that, can I ask you the question about, in accordance with the approvals that are within the realm of your responsibility as the planner for the town, have you followed the procedure that we have set out, and have you complied with the applications brought forward before you?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, this is, I believe, what would be expected. The bylaw that we're dealing with, bylaw 2016-41, is under the Municipal Act, not the Planning Act.
Yes.
However, as council is aware, it was created with the guidance and wisdom of Township Legal Counsel, and the way the bylaw is structured is to say that it is the owner's obligation to ensure that the site is clean and that the fill is in compliance with all ministry regulations. And it also indicates that drainage-related matters are also to be addressed at the responsibility of the owners. So I think generally the application, as we are dealing with it here tonight, is compliant with the bylaw that was crafted by legal counsel.
Okay. So, Mr. Treble, further, let's clarify. All complaints that have been received through 2017 have been addressed and staff have attended to the property. Is that correct?
Any complaints that have been brought to the attention of Planning and Building and Public Works Authority have been dealt with properly. I heard Mr. DeFilippis refer to complaints. I'm not aware of any specific complaint that came via him or his lawyer that are part of these discussions. The complaints I'm aware of came from other sources. But
You also mentioned the fact that this was outside. There is a hamlet boundary that runs through this property. Is that correct?
that's correct. The hamlet of Grimsby Center is the east third of this property.
Okay, the east third of this property. Okay, so this is a property outside the hamlet zoning.
The area in question is outside the hamlet zoning. That's
Thank you.
correct.
I just wanted clarification on all of that. I wanted to put those to rest. Our staff have complied with the process we had anticipated, in my opinion. I will go to you in a moment, Councillor Bylsma, but I wanted to ensure that we had understood that the process we envisioned for site alteration was in fact being complied with. Councillor Bilsma.
Thank you. Just one last time. And what I heard from the director was that the township's not liable. I'm comfortable with his answer with respect to this application, that my concerns and the concerns that were raised this evening would not come back to haunt us, so to speak.
Well, we've
So-
complied with the process we
Correct.
had envisioned.
So there's, the process was followed, and the two issues that were raised, this issue are the responsibility of the owners, so it doesn't, and so I'm comfortable with that. So we don't need to do the whole,
Go off
go
into the
off into a
wilderness.
tangent.
Thank
I'm
you.
ready to make a decision right here, right now.
Okay, great. Seeing no other comments, I will ask, as this recommendation is duly put and seconded, all in favor? Those opposed? Okay, thank you. That motion carries. Item 29-18, a recommendation report regarding zoning bylaw amendment for Steve Golfi and Alexandra Denome Clem, a temporary use bylaw for a mobile home. The recommendations are that report PD 03618 regarding Steve Golfi and Alexandra Clem, application for temporary use zoning file 1601-002-18, dated March 12, 2018, be received, and that Section 34, Sub 17 of the Planning Act apply, and that no further public meeting is required, that the application for temporary zoning bylaw amendment 1601-002-18 submitted by Steve Golfi and Alexandra Demone Clem be approved. I need a mover and a seconder. Mayor Joyner and Councillor Trombetta. Comments? Mayor Joyner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since this is the first step in order to get the residents to comply, I am hoping that council will find its way to approve this temporary use zoning file. There has been, shall we say, there's been certain people who have thought that perhaps maybe that the residents are in fact living there. So in order to continue down this road of making the residents comply, this is the first step. So I'm hoping that we will pass this. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other comments from members of committee regarding this? Seeing none, all in favor? That motion carries. Thank you. For those that are here for this evening's meeting regarding the item, I don't like to see people leave. We enjoy having you here, but if it's regarding the West Niagara Fairgrounds, that item is concluded. You're welcome to stay. Just thought I'd tell you. Okay. Sorry. Okay, item P30-18, Director of Planning Recommendation Report regarding a zoning bylaw amendment for Jeffrey and Anita Green. The recommendations on that report are that report PD 02-18 regarding Jeffrey and Anita Green application for rezoning file number 1601-015-17 dated February 12, 2018 be received, and that section 34 sub 17 of the Planning Act apply, and that no further public meeting is required, and that application for zoning bylaw amendment 1601-015-17 submitted by Jeffrey and Anita Green be approved. I need a mover and a seconder for that. Councillor Rayner, Councillor Ganaan. Comments? Seeing none? All in favor? That motion carries. Thank you. Item P31-18, a recommendation report regarding a zoning bylaw amendment at McFeeters Holdings, Inc., 2815 South Grimsby Road, 21. Recommendations to that report are that report PD 003-18 regarding an application for rezoning made by McFeeters Holdings, Inc., 2815 South Grimsby Road, 21, file 1601-016-17, dated March 12, 2018, be received, and that Section 34, Sub 17 of the Planning Act apply, and no further public meeting is required, and that application for zoning bylaw amendment 1601-016-17 submitted by McFeeters Holdings, Inc. be approved. I need a mover and a seconder for that. Councillor Bell, Councillor Bilsma. Comments? Yeah, I was getting there. Councillor Bell.
Just one, really. On the site plan for outside storage, the frontage, it was said that there was supposed to be some kind of a barrier put there years ago. It's never happened. I'd like to see that included in this site plan, that a board-on-board fence goes up there and it's followed through with. Other than that, I don't have any objections to the plan. Maybe Mr. Treble could address that.
Mr. Treble, did you want to comment on that? It's a direction from council that will have to be added as an amendment.
Through you, Madam Chair, I would agree. Staff is aware of that as a possibility, and we have worked on some language to potentially talk about some sort of a board-on-board fence along the front lot line. If that's the desire of council, we can certainly try and make that change. The one thing I can point out through you, Madam Chair, is that there's a long history on this property, and it goes back before any real extensive planning in the township. But I do have in front of me a bylaw from 1999, and even that bylaw from 1999 talks about outside storage. So I guess where I feel this really should be is a focus on the fact that we're just simply creating a new lot by dividing the business away from the farm. And one of the conditions was to make sure that the zoning line is in line with the proposed severed line between the business and the farm. This is not about changing the use. This is not about growing the business or expanding the business or sneaking some additional component of the business into the zoning. This is about recognizing the business that's there now and legalizing it, and then dividing it from the farm. So about the only additional wording that's new is really language that applies to the farm, and I don't believe that is really in question at all. The language that applies to the business is language that's been around for a long time. Having said that, however, should there be a desire to put some sort of board-on-board fencing along the front lot line, we're certainly willing to try and find some language to add into the bylaw. There is board-on-board fencing along the front lot line now to the south that appears to block where the tractor or the trailer parts of tractor-trailer units are stored. At the north end is where there's outdoor storage of bags, I'm guessing, of chips and that kind of a wood product. White plastic bags are there neatly piled. They're there today. They were there when Garrett and I were on site in December. And we've had some Google mapping up, which was from May of 2012, and they were there then. So they've been on the property for some time. It's not like it's a new use, and certainly from the language, they've been contemplated for a long time to have outdoor storage. So really the question becomes whether there's a desire to add some sort of a board-on-board fence to block or buffer that kind of use from the street.
Thank you, Mr. Treble. I have a speakers list started. Councillor Bell, you still have the floor?
No, I'm,
You're
at the
good?
appropriate time, I'd just like to have that added in.
Okay. Councillor Billsman?
Yeah, my concern was very similar, so I don't need to add or ask any more questions. with
Okay.
respect to that, yeah.
Councillor Trombetta?
Yeah, mine was also similar, but I would also, I know they said the board fencing, but I would also like to see some tree planting as well to also assist with board-on-board fencing if it's possible, also in the amendment that's being brought by Councillor Bell, Madam Chair. So I'd just like that as a comment, to see some tree being planted to also help as well in the board-on-board fencing.
Okay.
Do a nice landscaping, always planting some trees is always good in this community. Thank you.
Thank you. Just for clarification, the bylaw does go to council in 2 weeks. So in fact, we could direct staff just to complete what Councillor Bell's looking for, was we can get the gist of what's going on, but that could be contained in the bylaw that would come back to council. Is that appropriate? Because then staff won't be trying to put the right or wrong wording together this evening. But continue. Sorry, Councillor Rayner, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. through you to Mr. Treble. I believe Mr. McDougall mentioned something about trees on the northwest corner. There's supposed to have been trees as part of previous agreements, and there's no trees there. Could you give me an update on that, please?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm not really sure I can give an update on that. If there is a concern that the site plan that's in place on the property now is not complied with, then I would suggest that we should be dealing with that as a separate enforcement issue under the site plan. I can't speak to it tonight, I'm sorry.
It's part of a site plan that's in play already, so in fact, if we want to have enforcement on the existing site plan, we should send staff or instruct staff to go out there to see if we're in compliance with that one.
Madam Chair, I'm just not 100% sure if Mr. McDougall, I believe he indicated that it was part of the agreement and part of the site plan in the past that this was supposed to have been done and it wasn't done. So is there any way we can check with the site plan that exists right now to see if indeed the trees were part of that and they should have already been in?
I certainly think that, I think Mr. Treble has made the point that tonight's purpose for the report is for severing the farm from the business. And so if there's a problem with the existing site plan for the business, Mr. Treble will have to go back and look. He's not aware of it. But if there's if they are not in compliance with the business site plan, and if I'm wrong, Mr. Treble, please indicate that I'm getting this wrong, but the site plan pertaining to McFeeters, if there's non-compliance within that, that should come forward under the existing site plan. It's not something we have to enforce this evening. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, I would agree. There is a site plan that is signed and registered on a title. That's an enforceable document. And if there are compliance issues with that site plan, then they can be dealt with through enforcement in that avenue. I will say, however, that a lot of the berming and buffering requirements in the site plan are as the result of the certificates that have been issued by the Ministry of the Environment, because just about every certificate on that property has conditions attached to it. So if there's any berming, buffering, or tree plantings, it's likely that the ministry also required those. So not only do we have an enforcement authority at that point, I would say the ministry should also be involved.
Okay. So, Councillor Rayner, we will not lose our ability to proceed to look at the site plan and to enforce the site plan that's in play that requires trees if they were to be planted. But that's not what we're dealing with tonight. Tonight we're dealing with the farm. Yes, you have the floor. I'm just trying to get clarification so that we have two site plans on this property. That's the issue. Well, not really.
One's agriculture.
That's right. They're not really on the same property. You're right.
But we're dealing with the same company.
Okay, so your point?
My point is,
Could you turn your microphone on? Sorry.
I can't tell anymore because you took my phone. It used to be. You know, I could tell
Okay.
what was on. What I'm saying is that if it's the same company and they now want this relating to agriculture, but the business part has not met the obligations of the site plan, then to me, there's a credibility issue here. Why would I continue to do something else until the first step has been completed to the satisfaction of the agreed upon and is in the title site plan? And then when the credibility is established that everything has been met, then bring the second part forward, and I'd be more willing to entertain it. But if it's not, then it makes you believe that maybe this part won't be followed either. If you
Mr.
understand
Treble?
what I'm trying to say.
I think my answer to that would be, in 2009, there was an OMB hearing on this property.
Yes.
That too was dealing with not a swap of severance boundaries, but a swap of zoning boundaries, and was deliberated extensively by the board. There has been an ongoing history between the business owner and a neighbor. But quite frankly, in my professional opinion, I am not prepared to sit here tonight and say that there is any infraction of this use with the bylaw. I am not aware of one, and until there's an investigation done, I don't agree with the statement of Councillor Rayner in that regard.
Thank you. Councillor, you have an answer to your question. Have you another?
Yes, I was not trying to say that it wasn't done, I was just saying if the follow-up to ensure that it was done as preclude to this one, that's all.
Okay, question put and answered. Do you have other questions?
No, that's all.
Thank you. Councillor Bell?
I believe the reference that was made to the trees by Mr. McDougall goes back to the Ontario Municipal Board hearing. It's nothing to do with this application tonight. It come from the OMB hearing, so I agree with Mr. Treble. He's going to have to take it back and look at it and pull it out before he can make a comment on it. But tonight is the one we're dealing with for the fencing, the trees, and the property for severance and stuff. So that helps. That's where the comment come from, I believe, was the OMB hearing back then. Nothing to do with the site plan at all. Strictly OMB hearing.
Mr. Treble, did you want to have clarification on that?
Through you, Madam Chair, certainly the site plan itself did talk about berming and tree plantings, and as I said, so does the Ministry of the Environment. The one thing I can say that I recall from the file, and although the location is what's throwing me perhaps, the southwest corner of the business zone has a requirement for some tree plantings, and there is a letter from the owner, Mr. McFeeder, that says that the trees will be planted in the spring of 2018, but because of weather conditions and time of year, they couldn't be planted last year. So we have not completely signed off on the site plan. That certainly doesn't stop the planning process from entertaining an application such as the one before us. But there is a commitment in the file with respect to tree plantings in the southwest corner. I'm of the understanding there's something in the northwest or northeast corner, and I don't know what that is.
Okay. Just, Councillor Bell? Okay. Do we have securities on that particular site plan maintained at this point in time? Probably not.
Through you, Madam Chair, I really can't tell. This
Understood.
This
Understood.
site plan file predates me, so.
Yes. Okay. Councillor Ganam.
Thank you. Just a comment, first of all, and then a question. First of all, I would just like to commend staff. I saw the difference in the application go up to 11% and staff holding the line at 10%, and I was very pleased with that. It was our intent, I think, at the last public meeting that 10% was sort of the upper limit, and that I was pleased that there was no wiggle room there. So kudos to staff on that point. The second thing is, although we've been talking about it not being this property per se and that we're not looking at the business, on the report it does say, it goes on to say, it was also explained that the wood shaving business was unpredictable and the business model is consistently evolving. The applicants need a variety of uses to remain on the property to allow the business to adapt to continue the shaving business. And so obviously there's language there to allow for some flexibility of keeping that agricultural. I'm on page 222 of our agenda, page 4 of the report. In case somebody was looking for where I am. But it made me wonder if our language is also equally strong to ensure that if that shaving business is no longer viable down the road, do we still have language that protects that property as being an agriculturally related property? Or is that, you know, I guess I want to make sure, Mr. Treble, that there's not wiggle room there for somebody to say, whoops, shaving doesn't work anymore, you know, that's not a very good business, it's not profitable for us, and so now we're going to do X on that property. So,
Mr. Treble?
Through you, Madam Chair, that's why staff have tried to, and it's been with some considerable discussion with the applicant, have tried to get the zoning into the agriculture-related AR category of the zoning bylaw, because then that ties it down to indicate that it should be of an agricultural business type nature. The wording of the bylaw historically has just talked about industrial uses, limited to sawmilling for production, manufacturing, drying, processing, treating, and outdoor storage and sale of wood products for agricultural purposes. So we haven't really changed the intent, but we've put it into the agricultural zone category for the purpose of making sure that that industry or that industrial type use is of an agricultural nature. We tried to tie the zoning language and the language of the wording together, but it really hasn't changed. It does provide flexibility that, you know, it used to be, was it the sale or manufacture of telephone poles or something like that way
Yes.
back in the day? I'm assuming it was the manufacture of them. But, you know, it's been, I think, in transition from time to time over the 40-plus years that this property has had special zoning on it, and that flexibility has been there for that whole length of time.
Councilor Gannon? Okay. I'm going to him now. No problem. Councillor Bell, do you want to make comment that we will send staff away to have the bylaw improved before it's passed at council, or did you want to say something about changing the wording for this evening?
I would just like to be sure that you neither go through the bylaw of tonight, but that the site plan includes the outside storage, board-on-board fence, as Councilor Cabrera said, possibly some landscaping, mature trees, not seedlings, but definitely the board-on-board fence to be included. So,
Can you receive that as direction, Mr. Treble, and have that included, or have you got wording for tonight to propose?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think the recommendation that's before you is to approve the zones. So
Right.
I have some suggested language. I know right on the fly, I agree with you. Sorry,
No,
the mic isn't on, I'm sorry. I do have some language that we can put on the table. I don't know, Joanne, or did you do something too? Because, do you want me to do it, or do you want to? Yep.
I do have put together an amendment to the resolution. However, I just need probably a little bit of help with the tree part, because I was just kind of addressing the board-on-board fence. So at this moment, I have that the regulation section under section 4 of the draft zoning bylaw attached as attachment 6 to report PD 003-18 be amended to add the following words prior to the word no. So it quotes that a 1.8 meter board-on-board fence be constructed along the frontage of the subject lands from the north lot line 60 meters to the south, and also
include planting
of mature
I really do think
trees?
you're going to have to be careful on that word mature, because there will be arborists who would tell us mature is going to fail because they'll die. So we usually arborists usually talk calipers or something.
So I'm just not looking for shrubs.
I understand.
Or seedlings. We have an arborist actually here.
You do?
That knows the trees, maybe you can pipe in what type of trees you need.
I-
Trees?
We just want trees to grow, so whatever.
Correct, that's exactly.
The appropriate trees for the site that will survive. I think we understand. We don't want saplings. We're not looking for whips. We're looking for that can be planted and survive. Something of that nature. Mr. Treble?
Just, Madam Chair, for the benefit of committee, because I don't think we've mentioned here tonight, one of the other conditions of the committee is that the site plan also be amended accordingly to reflect the proposed new lot line. So the site plan is open for discussion, and we can make sure that this language is added to the site plan for the additional enforcement piece, and that can deal with perhaps the specific type of tree.
That's fair. So we're good? Okay. Having said that, all in favor? Sorry.
Sorry, I just need a
For the amendment, I have Councillor Trombetta, Councillor Bell. So, for the amendment, all in favor? That motion carries. For the main motion as amended, that motion also carries. Thank you. Tonight, it seems that we have to berm or not to berm on the agenda, but, okay. The next item on the agenda, do we need to do a 2-minute break, or we okay? Okay. Item P 32-18 is a naming of Lass Road and Hornack Road by bylaw and issuance of certificate of completion and assumption of streets and works for Spring Creek Estates. Developer is RBL Homes. The recommendations are that report PD 017-17 regarding the naming of Lass Road and Hornack Road by bylaw and issuance of certificate of completion and assumption of streets and works for Spring Creek Estates, developer RVL Homes, Inc., dated March 12th, be received, and that a bylaw be passed to officially name Lass Road and Hornack Road, and that a final certificate of completion be issued for Spring Creek Estates Plan 30M-400, and that the township assume the Spring Creek Estates Plan of Subdivision 30M-400 in accordance with Schedule A of the attached draft bylaw, and that the bylaw be passed to assume Lass and Hornack Roads. I need a mover. Councilor Bell, Council Mayor Joyner? All right, if you get your hand up, are you making that motion, seconding it?
I'll do both.
Okay, fine. By doing that, you get to speak first. Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Treble. The completion of the streetlights from the old style to the new style, is that something that the township has to take care with through NPEI, or is that something that the developer has to
Undertake.
Through you, Madam Chair, I have not had this discussion with Public Works. It likely has to do with the timing of when we entered the agreement with Mr. Budd, which if I'm recalling correctly, is 2012 or somewhere there. And I think the streetlights probably came after that. So I would need to go and consult Public Works to be sure. I take it, Madam Chair, from the question that the lights have not been changed, which would make me think they must be our responsibility, but I would need to investigate and report back.
Would you like that to come forward prior to the passing of the bylaw at council?
Yes,
Okay, so we'll have an answer to that. Is there a chance, Mr. Treble, that the old lights were put in and that there is no obligation on the part of the developer to change them, given that the agreement, at the time of the agreement, there was not a new style?
Through you, Madam Chair, that would be my thought, that we
Yeah.
probably went through the entire engineering review process with a
Exactly.
certain type of light standard that's not the LED standard of today. That would
Okay.
be
That
my
would be my thought.
expectation. Yeah.
So we'll have an answer for that prior to the approval of the bylaw at council. How's that?
Correct.
Okay, having said that, further comment on this? Seeing none, all in favor? That is approved. Item P 3318 regarding naming of Lass Road and Hornack Road and the issuance of a certificate of completion for Station Meadows Phase 4, developer P. Budd. And the recommendations there are similar to the previous item, and that is the PD 018-18 regarding naming of Lass Road and Hornack Road by bylaw and issuance of a certificate of completion and assumption of streets and works for Station Meadows North Phase 4, developer P. Budd Developments, Inc., dated March 12th, be received, and that a bylaw be passed to officially name Last Road and Hornack Road, and that a final certificate of completion be issued to Station Meadows North Phase 4, Plan 30M-399, and that the township assume the Station Meadows North Phase 4 subdivision 30M-399, in accordance with Schedule A of the attached draft bylaws, and that the bylaw be passed to assume Last Road and Hornack Road. I need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Ganaan, Councillor Bilsma. Comments? Mayor Joyner, did you want to talk about the streetlights?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Same inquiry for Peabody, please.
I agree. Having noted that, other comments? Failing to see any others, all in favor? That motion carries. Item P34-18, revision to medical marijuana provisions of the Township of West Lincoln Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw 2017-70. Pardon me. The recommendation is that report PD 040-18 regarding revisions to the medical marijuana provisions of the Township of West Lincoln's Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw 2017-70 dated March 12th, 2018 be received, and that a public meeting be held to give consideration to the changes to the medical marijuana provisions based on draft provisions at Attachment 1 being provided to the public for input and comment. I need a mover for that. Councillor Bell, seconder. Councillor Bilsma. Comments at this time? This is the start of a new process. Councillor Bell.
It's a good start, and I'd like to see just a couple minor changes, staff suggestions. Where number 2, designated growers and individual licenses. To grow on someone else's land not permitted, that's good. Here's, and an individual could grow on their own property for their own purposes. And I'd like to see it put in there that, to add within the legal limits of all governing laws, including local bylaws. So you're growing on your own property, it's within the legal limits of the law, plus bylaws that we may have in place now or in the future. And number, go ahead.
No, it's just, this is the staff's recommendation at this point to go out for public comment.
Yeah.
So I understand,
Okay.
but this is the staff's recommendation. If you're putting those in,
I just wanted to,
you want to do it now or at
Suggest
the
them.
public meeting?
can do it at the public meeting, they can add them now, whichever takes their fancy. If it's out there now, then the public can comment on it, whether they want it or not.
It's, okay, staff are taking note of them, but this is okay, so as long as staff are taking note of it before it's circulated.
Yeah.
Okay,
And-
keep
and
going.
And the next one would be, when we deal with the licenses, only proper greenhouses be permitted, not hoop greenhouses.
Is that in one of the points now? I don't remember that.
No, it would be number 4.
Okay,
It would be added. That we deal with a proper greenhouse, not hoop greenhouses.
hoop,
Hoop.
hoop, hoop, H-O-O-P. It's okay. There we go. If we're going to continue that tone of voice, Councillor Bell, these guys are going to need earmuffs. Okay, so was that your question also, Mr. Councillor Rayner?
I would assume a proper greenhouse is only a cement foundation and glass walls.
A glass greenhouse.
That's what I would assume. But see, when you say proper, it depends on who is looking at it, what they consider to be proper. I think it needs to be defined a little more.
So I think our bylaws have definitions at the beginning of them, which could define, I think if we could talk about that.
I believe
Councillor
so.
Bell and Mr. Treble can probably figure out the definition that wants to be had there. And it's for discussion, right?
Yes.
So I think we can get,
Yep,
those are good recommendations. Thank you, Councillor Bell. Any others?
no, I'm good.
You good? Other comments with regard to this? I was getting to you, sorry. Yes, Mayor, no, who are you? Mr. Treble, sorry.
I am so sorry, Madam Chair. Through you, it wasn't until you were reading the recommendation that it hit me. We're asking to circulate the draft provisions at Attachment 1 for public input and comment, but they're actually at Attachment 2. So there's a typo in the recommendation.
You know, I was looking at that, except that the bylaw 2014-17 has attachment 1 at the top of it. So I wasn't exactly sure where that went wrong. On page 344, it says attachment 1 to PDO 4018. So,
Correct, but we want to circulate the draft new bylaw, which is at page 347.
you're right. Okay, that's, okay. Fair enough. So we have a typo. We'll take that as an administrative correction. Sorry, I just went back to my main agenda. Seeing no other comments. Oh, Councillor Gannan, sorry.
Thank you. I'm just waiting my turn. I haven't really had the opportunity to pick this apart the way you know I will. Having just returned home at 12:35 last night, early this morning. But the one thing I'm not sure that we can do, my question to you, Mr. Treble, is staff are suggesting the following changes, and the one is that designated growers and individual licenses to grow in someone else's lands not be permitted. However, I'm not sure how we can do that when it is permitted with a designated grower's license. So, for example, if Councillor Bilsma wanted to grow on our lot because, you know, the yard is big enough, there is a way to get a license to do that. So I'm just not sure of how that will fit together with the legislation from Health Canada.
Mr. Treble.
Through
Now that I
you.
remember who you are.
My thought, through you, Madam Chair, would be that Councillor Gannan is correct that Health Canada will issue such a license or registration or whatever title you give it, but in all instances it indicates it is subject to all local rules and regulations, including land use planning. So it's my understanding through discussions with Sarah Premi that we can in fact do that because of the fact that local land use planning laws apply.
Well, you know, I'm
However-
delighted to hear that. So that's, I'm
However-
not looking to be critical of this. I'm very pleased. I just want to make sure we're on sure footing here.
Enforcement could be another challenge, and through you, Madam Chair, just for the record, one more review by legal counsel will occur before any recommendation report comes forward, just for the purposes of enforcement, to make sure that we feel we have a bylaw that we can take to the courts and survive with. So.
Wonderful.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor, you're done? I am done. Excellent. Now, this file doesn't go to the OMB. This goes to the courts. If there were breaches to the bylaw?
Through you, Madam Chair, to get this language in place or some variation of this language will end up going to the new appeals tribunal, I would assume, if
Right.
there are appeals to that draft document once it gets to the point of a recommendation of council.
Right. Okay. Okay. So that those motions are properly put and seconded. So failing to see any other comments, all in favor? That motion carries. What about Councillor Bell's changes? Okay. We've taken those as directed. Item P35-18 is a recommendation report that proposes a maximum height increase to 6 stories in the commercial core and high-density residential designations of the Township of West Lincoln's official plan, a corresponding zoning bylaw amendment. The recommendation in full is that report PD 01518 regarding proposed maximum height increase to 6 stories in the commercial core and high-density residential designations of the Township of West Lincoln's official plan and corresponding zoning bylaw amendment dated March 12th, 2018 be approved. And that staff be authorized to proceed with an open house and public meeting to seek input on height changes within the core commercial and high residential density designations and the corresponding zoning bylaw amendment, and to draft policy and regulation for consideration by the Township Committee and Council. I need a mover and a seconder for that. Mayor Joyner, Councillor Bell. Comments? Councillor Bilsma?
I realize that this is kind of an initial thing. Sorry about that. I realize that this is an initial stage, and there's an open house. In general, I'm very concerned about this. So with respect to staff's desire to put together a recommendation, I would say that as far as I'm concerned, don't waste your time. I realize this is going to be public input and it's initial, but my reaction to this is 5 is significant for our little village at this time. So I'm not in favor of moving in the direction of 6-story. Thanks. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Earlier tonight, you saw that not only are we worried about height, but you've already had to look at the MOECC looking at community emissions reduction when you're doing your planning. So the world of planning changes day by day. Other comments? Councillor Bell, sorry.
Through you, Madam Chair. I guess I'm not opposed to it, but I think we're doing it kind of backwards. I don't want to be another Grimsby, okay? That's just a big
Another which?
Grimsby.
Oh,
I'd rather us have the public open house. Let's get their input. Let's bring our recommendations forward and let's move on from there. But to say we're going to do 6 stories, then have the open house, when you have your public meeting, there's going to be that again, foregone conclusion by the public that it's a done deal. They already approved 6 stories, so why am I going to put anything into it? Where I think if we have the open house, let's get their input, let planning look at it and come back with the recommendation, whether it be the same or different. They might come back and say, hey, we like 8 stories. I don't know. But, you know, we are growing. There are going to be additional stories. You know, 5 is not going to be the number for sure. But I think we need to get the public's input first. Just my opinion. Thank you.
Councillor Rayner. Did you want to speak to that point, Mr. Treble? Okay.
Through you, Madam Chair. Staff have really been struggling with the whole issue and all of the various changes that are happening to policy and a lot of provincial changes that have been coming through of late, and we're trying to find ways that allow us to meet provincial requirements, meet our intended growth targets that council has passed and given to staff, and still be the small town quaint community that Smithville is. So so that's the struggle, and I think we're all going to face it. The reason staff have put 6 on the table is quite frankly because if we didn't put a number on the table, we'd never really get clear direction. So this way at least the public have something to react to, and staff are of the understanding that for towns of this size or towns of the size that Smithville is intended to grow to by 2041, 6 is a reasonable number. And that's the basis that we have put 6 in the report. But certainly from staff's perspective, there is nothing that has been determined or decided. Public may come in for higher densities, and certainly staff can consider that. The one thing I think I do have to say, just in all honesty for the record, given the way this province is currently going, given the policy regime that this province is currently putting in place, if we don't do this, it could be forced upon us, because it's becoming very clear that this government has no desire to allow for ongoing sprawl of the nature of what historically occurred in the outer ring of the GTHA, I guess it's called these days. So really and truly, we need to, I think, look at density, and if we do it right, hopefully it still fits within the character of Smithville. It also, as the chair has alluded to, speaks to part of the climate change mandate that we now have to give consideration to with every application, and to a point that's near and dear to Councillor Rayner. The higher and more dense the development inside the existing boundary, the less land you need to consume, which also helps minimize the impact on vehicle traffic and therefore climate change, et cetera. So there's a lot of moving pieces in this. I think in all fairness, we need to give this some serious thought. If we don't, the world might pass us by. So that's just for the record, but certainly just to start a public consultation process is all we're trying to do with this report.
Thank you, Mr. Treble. I have next Councillor Rayner.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
I appreciate Mr. Treble's comments, because that's what I did say when you were talking about urban boundary expansion. I said, why don't we put some taller buildings up, which would certainly save the destruction of agricultural land, and in a rural community and agricultural community, that's what we would like to preserve. So that makes a lot of sense. Councillor Bell alluded to what's going on in Grimsby, but look what happened to Burlington. The OMB decision to put that monster building right down by the lake shore that doesn't fit anything in the context of the buildings around it was probably as crazy as I've ever seen approved by the OMB. And again, I believe it was, as Mr. Treble said, it was based on density. So, yeah, things are changing, and 6 certainly looks a lot smaller than 40. And it is a direction to go if you want to increase the population but not sacrifice a lot of land. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bell, sorry.
Just one quick thing, maybe Mr. Treble could address page 356, attachment 2. We all got a handout tonight that was left on our desk, dealing with some of the lots. Maybe Mr. Treble could just let council know what that was about.
Through you, Madam Chair, attachment 2 was intended to be a map that identified 2 properties that are kind of in the center of the map that we thought might be, we being staff, thought might be appropriate lots to consider higher density on, and they're not currently designated for higher density in the official plan. So we wanted to kind of throw those out there. By default, though, other areas were identified with similar hatching, but it's the 2 properties identified with the red outline that were really the focus of the map. And as a result, if you look at the attachment 2 that's in the report, Stepping Stones, which is just above Creekview Drive on the drawing, was identified in the purpley color, which suggested it was a service commercial, and that was not right. Stepping Stones is in fact the medium density residential. So the map before you is a corrected map to show Stepping Stones as the orange color that it was meant to be. I'm not sure how that happened, but it was a good catch. So this is meant to replace page
356?
3 in your package.
Thank you. Councillor Bilsman?
Sorry, just a quick question. If we have a public meeting, will council have an opportunity, do we have an opportunity to speak there too, or is that strictly for the public, and then we take those comments and we can ask at a different time?
Public meetings are part of the Planning Act. We have an official meeting requirement in order to change something in our official plan or an amendment, and that's where the public get to speak. But we also get to speak at those, but we're supposed to listen during the public meeting and not come with our minds made up. But when the item comes forward, after due consideration by staff and a report is there, you have opportunity to speak and think about how you want to vote.
So this is public in the very typical sense that we have in planning evenings, and not a special Wednesday night rent the hall.
We might, if the agenda was full and we thought we were going to have a whole bunch of people, we might decide we
Okay,
want to have a
so
special.
it's not off the table either. Okay, thank you. That's all.
Mr. Treble.
Madam Chair, my apologies. The only difference to the sort of typical process, is the open house concept. So I suppose I put it on the table only to ask whether the open house is something that committee feels should be chaired through committee, or whether it's an open house of staff and council can come and go like public, or if there's a desire or a preference in that regard. I'm not sure there's anything in the act that specifically explains how that's to unfold. So
Oftentimes, before you go to a public meeting where it's confined to an us and them, more or less, environment, a public meeting is held so that people can look at pictures and demonstrate what the architectural changes could be, or how intensification could cause problems, and public have a chance to interact with our staff, not with council. And then, after the public meeting and the input is received, it comes to a public meeting, which would come here for the public to have input, and then for our consideration. So I apologize. I didn't catch that either. I noticed that I have Mayor Joyner and then anyone else who wishes to speak to the option they prefer.
Well, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I'm just a little confused, but I thought, is it a public meeting or is it an open house that we're having, or is it the director is asking what is our preference?
How would you like to proceed?
I see. Thank
Open
you.
house, then a public meeting, or a public meeting only?
Can I comment to that, Madam Chair?
Now you've got the floor.
Mr. Treble, Director Treble, isn't it usually the way you do it is that if you have an open house, and maybe it can be done both ways, but isn't it usually that you have an open house once you actually have an application before you? Much the same as how they did it in Grimsby?
through you, Madam Chair, I think generally in this day and age, the concept of open house is becoming a more common term and can be used for a broad cross-section of different opportunities. It's just that less formal opportunity for one-on-one dialogue, a chance for people who might be afraid or intimidated to speak in this kind of setting to have a chance to have their say and maybe better or more fulsome understand exactly what's proposed. So, long story short, though, it probably suggests, as the chair has already alluded to, that there would be some display boards or some materials that could be looked at, and they would be along the flavor of the concepts that we've floated around angular planes and density or bonusing requirements, as well as probably a map that shows where the core area designations are and the high-density residential designations are, and then a staff opportunity for comment. That's kind of what I would anticipate, and council invited to attend should they wish, but not be mandated to be here. And then the formal public process would happen after that sometime.
Sir, yes, you do.
So if I was to put forward my preference would be just what Mr. Treble said, in the fact that we have an open house, an informal evening, maybe afternoon, and then come forward with the public meeting. That would be my preference, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Gannan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Further to what Councillor Bell alluded to when he was talking about not wanting to have it look like our minds are already made up first, about it being, 6 being the number, and appreciating what you said, Mr. Treble, about needing to come up with a number. Is there a way that we can present that to the public so that we're not perceived to have been saying to ourselves, well, 6 is it, and then people feel like they have to come and fight to make it 7 or make it 5 or whatever? I think what Councillor Bell, if I can understand what he was saying anyway to begin with, is thinking that we don't want that kind of a big fight where it looks like we've already made up our minds and we're holding a public meeting that just says, okay, we're giving you a chance to say something, but we really don't want you to say something if it doesn't agree with what it is that we already think. Is there a way to make that clear that it's kind of a placeholder number? It's what we think is appropriate, but it's not etched in stone until there is public input.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm sure there's a way we can do it. If that's the desire, then we'll certainly make sure that the language is chosen carefully to indicate that it's a concept, but certainly no more than that at this point. And
I think that would be wise based on the fact that we've made decisions about other things. And I think we don't want the public to feel, yes, we're holding a public meeting, but we've already made up our minds and we know what it is that we want. I think we have to appreciate that staff has looked very carefully at what would be appropriate and that we're not knocking that, but we certainly are open to other comments and ideas. So Thank you.
Councillor Bell?
So I guess what we're trying to do through staff, they've looked at this for a while, obviously, and it is well thought out. It's time to move forward, understood. So we're trying to be proactive instead of reactive here. We want to be out in front of this because the day's coming when we're going to be told, this is what you have to do. We'd rather make our own decisions if I understand this. And just for the record, I'm all for the open house, the concept, because I agree again with what staff said. Some people do have valid comments, but they don't want to come before council and sit there and make these comments. They're more relaxed atmosphere, just walking around looking at boards, making comments to staff, and if a councilor's here, that's fine, you know. So that's just where we're at, I guess, is being proactive. And I'm all for the open house, just for the record, so.
Okay, good. Well, I also want to make sure that the staff realize that this is a good move to do something because we'll be, it won't be pass us over, but bowl us over. Councillor Rayner brought up Burlington, but in the little fishing village of Bronte in Oakville, there was an application made that took the entirety of the fishing village concept away when a 40-story high-rise was put forward and concluded in that village, and subsequent to that changed the whole texture and face of that community. So I think we need to pay some attention. So my question would be, Mr. Treble, 6 stories, if we're talking residential, which is a floor plate that's shorter than a commercial building, we probably, the tallest building in Smithville right now in our urban area is probably the old mill. Would I be correct? Unless you're a church steeple.
Through you, Madam Chair, my understanding is the sort of the highest parts of some of the piping on the existing mill would probably be getting close to the 5 to 6 story range right now. Residential story.
Because commercial
yes.
16 feet,
That's right.
residential is about 8 or 10,
10.
or something.
Yeah.
So the whole idea of what we're looking for is a concept that says we don't exceed what it is that we really see as the highest stuff right now in the town. So if we talked about that kind of a concept, 6-story or not, is of residential, that would be probably, it would be sympathetic to what we have. But the whole idea of Section 37 bonusing, and might you just talk to that, is something that we've never dealt with, and that is where people come in and apply for higher than normal acceptance.
Through you, Madam Chair, 37 bonusing is something that at the staff level with, I should say, all of staff providing some help and guidance is an opportunity where a developer could come forward with a concept that's higher than what our provisions say. And our answer back basically is, well, we can talk about that, but what are you going to do for us? And it gives opportunities for council based on a set list of criteria that we have to establish to say, you know, some affordable housing will be required in lieu of going up to 7 stories or 8 stories or whatever it might be, or some other concepts of that nature. And so that kind of a policy set we're suggesting should be put into this document at this time as well, so that it gives us some leverage to say to people, we have some flexibility, but here is what you're going to do for the community, and it's going to be something that's of community benefit. It's not cash, it's things done in lieu, and affordable housing is one of the examples. It's
Many.
That's true, and Alexa's just saying that there are provisions that we can cap the exception, so if you want to go up, let's say 20% beyond what's permitted or something like that, we can regulate it that way too.
So it's another brave new world, was my point, is that Section 37 and shadowing from the building compared to somebody else, and payments in lieu of parkland and open space versus all the rest of the stuff, and public open space, private open space, all that stuff, we're going to have to pay very close attention to. So I just don't want us to misunderstand that if we want rental properties in West Lincoln, we may have people wanting to give us an exception. So this is a process where council will be learning as much as the public, I think. as we're forced to look at it. So I think I hear a consensus about open house and then public meeting. And I don't think we have to put that into a vote. It's just that that's what we're going to do, open house and then public meeting. So that being said, the recommendation on the floor as put, then all in favor? That motion carries. Okay, thank you very much. We have a technical report next for a comprehensive zoning bylaw housekeeping amendment. And the report and the recommendations are that PDO 39-18 regarding the comprehensive zoning bylaw housekeeping amendments dated March 12, 2018 be received, and that a public meeting be held as required by the Planning Act at a future Planning, Building, Environmental Committee meeting. I need a mover and a seconder for that. Councillor Rayner, Councillor Ganam. Pardon me. Comments? Seeing none, all in favor? That motion carries. The item 37-18, which is an information report regarding the update on the review of Spring Creek Heights Secondary Plan. And the recommendation on that report is that PDO 38-18 regarding the update on the review of Spring Creek Secondary Plan dated March 12, 2018 be received for information. I need a mover for that. Councillor Bell, Councillor Ganant. Okay, I wasn't sure. Okay, I saw it move. Anyway, comments on that? It's received for information, so all in favor? That motion carries. Okay, we have some other business items, and that is a draft letter to Health Canada regarding the licensing of individuals to produce medical marijuana that has been prescribed by a medical doctor. That was brought forward as a result of a recommendation by members of committee, council, I think. Oh, excuse me. It is turned on. Any comments? I broke my own rule, folks. I apologize. I thought I hit off. Anyway, the letter is before you. It is to the Minister of Health at Ottawa. The letter is a draft. If there's a desire to make comments, I would suggest that we take this back to staff and that the comments go to members of the staff, and then that we send it out closer to council. Would that be fair? Okay. And the next item of other business, that was it. Oh, no, it's members of the committee. Oh, I'm sorry, that the draft letter to Health Canada under the signature of Mayor regarding court concerns relating to licensing of individuals and designated persons to produce medical marijuana be and is hereby approved. I actually have two comments I'd like to make, if we're going to do that. Yeah. Can I remove Councillor Billsma, Councillor Bell? Okay. Are there any comments? Yes, Mr. Mayor. I was getting.
Well, I was listening to what you were saying, Madam Chair, and you just said that you have a couple comments to it, but previous to that, you said that we would
bring it back to council before we sent it.
Yeah.
I thought that was the appropriate thing.
Yeah.
I know I've seen this, and I probably have had more time to think about it, but I would imagine that if members of committee wanted to say anything, they could contact Mr. Treble, and we would have the final brought back to council. You've got the floor, Mr. Mayor.
I wouldn't mind hearing what other councillors have to say. So you had a couple of recommendations that you wanted to add, Madam Chair. If you could just do an email to all members of council.
Sure, mine are very minor, but I think that they're major in context, but yeah.
Other councillors might be thinking the same way as you are, though. So if we could see that, or any other councillor who wants to make an amendment to it, I'd love to see what they have to say.
So, Madam Clerk, that suggests that the motion that is now properly put and seconded would be incorrect in that the item, we refer this to council, and that comments from members of committee be directed to Mr. Treble and to all members of committee so that we can share this before it comes back in a final state at council. I'm looking for that now, since you finished typing. The mayor and Councillor Bell. So that referral motion, all in favor? That motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay, so the only item left in the public session of this night's meeting is the members of committee, other business matters of an informative nature. Councillor Bell?
Just going to say about our Big Brothers and Big Sisters Bowling.
Yes.
It was held last Saturday. Had a good turnout. I'm not sure how they did financially, but I'm guessing it was pretty good from what I've seen. And sad to say that Grimsby beat us again. Other than that, it was a great day.
Thank you. Other comments? Councillor Gannon, don't talk to us about Saba. It's hard enough looking at that tan. No one else has comments? I'm seeing, okay, so I'm assuming that there are no other updates or comments of an informative nature, so that draws us to a close of the public agenda and moves us to the confidential matters, which are item P40-18, campaign coaches and Director of Public Works, a legal matter, personal matter, or personal matter relating to identifiable individuals, MERS funding campaign, and the applicable closed session exemption is personal matters about identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose, and that will be a verbal update. Item P41-18, which is the legal matter of a notice of appeal, and the applicable closed session exemptions are personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board, and or advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. That will be a verbal update. The third item is P42-18, which is a building and septic permit issue, and the applicable closed session exemptions are personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board, and advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. That, too, is a verbal update. And the final item, item 4, is a personnel matter regarding staffing issues, and the applicable closed session exemptions are personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, and labor relations or employee negotiations. That, too, will be a verbal update. So with that, we move into confidential matters, and I need a mover. Councillor Trombetta, Councillor Bilsma. Hang on, let me get this one done. All in favor? That motion carries. And yes, we will, whoops. I can't give you a 5-minute recess. The CAO talks.
Through you to members of the committee, I just wanted to mention that item A indicated that Glenn Boy and the Director of Public Works, Brent Julian, would be here. I will be dealing with that matter in their absence, and will explain.
That's fine. Thank you very much for that clarification. Okay, so as we recess, we'll take a 5-minute break to reconvene in camera.